Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us to celebrate the closing of Voices of Lombard Street, the long-standing, beloved core exhibition of the JMM. As Zoe mentioned, the exhibit opened in 2007. It's had a 16-year long and strong run, and I want to say thank you and congratulate Anita Kassoff and Deborah Weiner, the co-curators of Voices of Lombard Street, on the development and presentation of such a meaningful exhibition. It's an exhibition that really grounds Baltimore's Jewish community to its roots in this neighborhood, and that grounding is the kind of important work that an exhibition and a museum can do. More than 150,000 people have experienced this exhibition, and now as we prepare to take it down, I'm grateful that the research, the writing, the archival work that was done in its development lives on in this catalog. It's a substantial catalog. It's a primary reference for me often. We're grateful to have several former JMM staff members who participated in the presentation of this exhibition with us today, including former Executive Director Avi Dechter. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank everyone who served on the museum's board of directors during the 16-year run of this exhibition. Today, 4 generations of our board president, Erica Reef Hornstein's family, are in attendance. Thank you all for being here. We find ourselves gathering in very difficult times. Our thoughts are with all who remain imperiled by the ongoing war in Israel and Gaza. And within these difficult times, we remain committed to the museum's mission to connect people to Jewish experiences and Maryland's Jewish communities to its roots. We work to inspire people to explore history, to take action, and imagine a better future. That is our mission, and within it, we work to confront anti-Semitism by educating the public about the history and lived experiences of Jewish Marylanders, by continuing to cultivate, along with our partners at B'nai Israel, this Herbert Behrman campus as a place where Jewish life and culture thrive. I'm going to take a few minutes to share with you all some highlights of the capital renovations that are scheduled to take place in the museum's front of house. The construction phase of this project is scheduled to begin in the coming weeks and conclude next summer. But first, some background, because of course at the museum we want to historicize this project. So let me set it into some historical context. The Jewish Museum of Maryland was established as a successor organization to the Jewish Historical Society of Maryland, a historical society that was formed in 1960. Over the course of the 1960s, the Historical Society acquired, renovated, and began its stewardship of the Lloyd Street Synagogue. In 1998, the JMM was formally established as a museum as the successor organization to the Historical Society. And throughout the intervening 25 years, this museum evolved its practices and grew its collections, which now consist of more than 12,000 objects and more than 1,500 linear feet of archival documents. And the museum staff and docents have educated thousands about Jewish life in Maryland. Now, a generation later, the JMM is poised to modernize its building to ensure that its mission can be fulfilled for the next generation. 1 year from now, we will have moved our museum fully into the 21st century with a modernized and elegant front of house. The architectural renderings that are presented on this side of this space provide a visual entry into the transformative change that the museum is preparing to undergo. Through this project, the JMM will refashion its front of house to ensure that its architecture and technology support the evolution of museum practices across the field. Our lobby will be relocated to the area that is currently occupied by the gift shop to enhance the visitor experience at the point of entry. We will transform this space that we're in right now into an arcade, an architectural reference to the 19th century where arcades were considered magical encyclopedias that opened onto a world of affinities. Arcades are spaces that serve to transform the historical into the intimate. The existing series of archways in this arcade will become portals that will present objects from the museum's collections and include interactive technologies allowing visitors to explore the rich content produced by the JMM. The creation of an audio-video production studio and a new multimedia gallery are centerpieces of this front-of-house update. The production studio will allow us to deepen our work in the digital arena, elevate the quality of our digital productions, and accelerate our evolution as a participatory museum, as we intend to use it to capture more stories of Jewish Marylanders with sophisticated technologies. We will also create a multimedia experimental gallery that will be contiguous with the production studio and be used for gallery shows, performance, as a staging area for production, and much more. The transformation of the JMM front of house is phase one of a multi-phase capital project. Future phases include the renovation of the former Lenny's Deli and programmatic incorporation of that building into the museum's campus, the renovation of 5 Lloyd Street, that's the building on the north side of the Lloyd Street Synagogue, the renovation of 5 Lloyd Street to co-house our growing collections, the creation of a Holocaust testimonial theater, the continued restoration of the Lloyd Street Synagogue to include increasing accessibility, and renovations of the museum's reading room and back of house. We're on the precipice of transformative change, growth that will set us up for this work to continue, for our mission to continue to be fulfilled into the future. 2 years from now, we will open a new core exhibition, and through that exhibition, we will adapt themes from the book On Middle Ground, also co-authored by Deborah Weiner. Thank you, Deborah, for all of your great work. That book details the specificity of Jewish experience in Maryland, themes of Jews and middleness, Jews as in-between geographically, socially, racially, economically, and otherwise, in the middle. We will adapt through lines from the book into the exhibition. The exhibition will tell the stories of the historic synagogues on our campus and the various congregations that have moved through them. It will provide everyone who lives in Maryland and identifies as Jewish an opportunity to see themselves and their families represented in our core exhibition through a statewide photo collecting initiative. And this project includes the creation of a Holocaust survivor testimonial theater that will position the JMM as a central location for the reception of survivor testimonials with a relation to Maryland. And critically, we will launch an initiative to use our production studio to record the testimonials of the descendants of survivors to allow us to continue to tell that history through the generations. There's a lot in development here at the JMM. We are excited about how it is all coming together. I want to thank you all once more for being with us here today. If you're interested to support our capital project or the development of our next core exhibition, please see myself or the JMM's development coordinator, Chris Snezik, standing right over there. And with that, thank you once more. I'll turn it back over to Zoe.
Thank you, Saul. It's my pleasure to introduce the next segment of our program, where we'll have the opportunity to learn more about Voices of Lombard Street from Anita Kassoff, Executive Director of the Baltimore Museum of Industry and co-curator of the exhibition, Deborah R. Weiner, historian, co-author of On Middle Ground, A History of the Jews of Baltimore, and co-curator of the exhibition. Joining us to moderate today's conversation is Marcia Semmel, co-editor of Changes Required, Preparing for the Post-Pandemic Museum, and author of Partnership Power, Essential Museum Strategies for Today's Networked World, which includes a chapter devoted to the JMM's collaboration here in the Jonestown neighborhood. Please join me in welcoming Anita, Deb, and Marcia.
Well, I thank you for the introduction, and I have to say, I've been involved with museums since 1975, and I don't know that I've ever been invited to a public celebration of the closing of a beloved exhibition. So I want to give Saul and his staff a round of applause for recognizing not only how beloved this exhibit has been, but doing a kind of proper way of, even as you're moving on with such exciting future plans, giving us all the honor to celebrate, do a little grieving and a little excitement about the future. So let's just applaud the museum for doing this whole event. It's very, very exciting. And I have to also say that the book that Zoe referenced, Changes Required, Preparing for the Post-Pandemic Museum, one of the co-editors, in fact, I would say co-editor-in-chief, is Avi Dechter. So I've gotten to know Avi for a long time since he was here, but it's been a pleasure to keep working with him as we've both moved into different stages of our lives and careers. So thank you, Avi. And thank you, Anita and Deborah. It was really fun just now to go back through the exhibit, and I've got a few questions for you. We have a limited time, but I guess why don't we start with, what was your overall goal in doing this exhibit? In other words, what was the context for creating this exhibit, putting it together, and what did you hope to achieve? So, Deborah, can we start with you?
Well, to start with, the context of what was going on in the neighborhood was very important to us. At that time, when I first came to the museum in 2002, there was no housing. The place was flat. Hope 6, the housing that you see around in the neighborhood today had not yet been built, and it was in the process of going up. And it was just an incredible change going on in the neighborhood. So one thing that we were determined to do was that we wanted to present the Jewish experience here, the immigrant Jewish experience, but we wanted to connect it with what was going on today, to connect the past to the present, and to show how different people had lived here through the years, and to give something to our core audience, which is the Jewish community of Baltimore, but also go beyond that a little bit and really show how the different groups of people have used the space, similarities, and just show like sort of the continuity amidst the tremendous changes that were taking place. So I think by the time the exhibit opened, the housing was up, but we kind of went through that whole process of change with the neighborhood. So.
One of the things I like are the maps in the exhibit that kind of give you that sense of neighborhood change. Anita, what, you know?
Same question?
Yeah, same question, you know. Yeah.
Well, I agree with everything Deb said. I think it was a time of great optimism. There was a sense that the residential change going on in the neighborhood was going to spur commercial change. It was also a time of collaboration between the JMM and some of the other cultural and historic sites in the neighborhood. The Jonestown Planning Council was very active at that time, and there was a recognition that there was a richness of history in this neighborhood between this museum, the McKim Center, the Schott Tower, the Carroll Museum. So I think it was a time when we felt that collaboration was going to make the neighborhood better, and I think that the exhibition reflects that sense of optimism, but we felt it was important at that time to look back in order to lay some foundation for what we hoped was going to come.
So I think, like most really good exhibitions, the exhibit brings together sound scholarship and the voices of the community and really powerful design, including sound design and some interactives. Could you talk a little bit about how you developed that project? When you see the finished project, it looks kind of easy, like, oh, of course. But we know that at every step of the way you had to make some decisions. And could you talk a little bit about that process?
Well, I think we should start with the JMM's incredible oral history collection, which, I mean, if you look at the quotes that are in the exhibit and the things people said, they're so evocative and so on point. And we just knew we had this tremendous resource that we really needed to use and, as much as possible, tell the story through the words of the people who actually lived here back when it was a Jewish neighborhood. And there was also a great oral history collection from the Baltimore, the BCLM, right? City Life Museums, we had oral histories from, you know, Italians, blacks. There were different oral history collections throughout the city that we could draw on for the later years. So very early on, I think we decided that it would be told through voices. And we also wanted it to be as immersive as possible, and that's where the tremendous design came in. Chuck Mack, who's not here, was the designer, and Chris Smith, who is here, was the sound designer. So, you know, in a cost-effective way, because we didn't have tons of money, we wanted to make it sort of, I don't know, it's not state-of-the-art necessarily, but to get as much, to be as immersive as possible so people could really go in and sort of feel like they're walking through the neighborhood. And I think Chuck's design did a tremendous job of doing that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I will say those oral histories were absolutely an inspiration. I think you came up with the title for the exhibition. And so we felt as if there was a lot of participation in the creation of the exhibition, but it was not exhibition development or design by committee. We had really the luxury of moving forward pretty fluidly, pretty easily without a lot of bureaucracy, and I think that was a wonderful way to make an exhibition. We also had the luxury, although we were fundraising, we had generous benefactors, and the Tolkoffs, who are here now, actually made a decisive gift at an important moment. So we had enough time, enough money, and we weren't really encumbered by a lot of things that sometimes make it difficult to create an exhibition. So I think that the vision for portraying those voices and creating an immersive environment that would appeal to a variety of audiences, I think we were able to move forward with that with a kind of ease that led joy to the making of the project.
Yeah, and a lot of it was just fun to think of things like, oh, having the fruits and the vegetables. And, you know, I don't know who did the research on a lot of the material stuff that was put in, because that's not my expertise.
I went to the consignment stores.
But
I had a great time.
Yeah, people had a
It was really
great time
fun.
going to consignment stores and looking online to find, you know, all the crazy stuff like the fish in the bathtub and that kind of thing. So, you know, we just tried to be as creative as possible and not limit ourselves to, you know, what is usually done, and not be afraid to do kind of things that were a little bit silly even, I guess.
Well, and you mentioned joy, Anita, and you talked a little bit when we had a preliminary discussion about the ways in which people on the staff and the community contributed to the making of these. But you want to share a couple of those stories?
I believe that the bathtub belongs to the designer, Chuck Mack. The chicken crates are from my grandparents' farm. So there were a lot of fun ways that people contributed, and then also more meaningful ways. I mean, Deb mentioned the amazing oral history collections, but we also went out, I remember, to community meetings and really listened. It was important that we heard from people in the making of the exhibition.
Yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, because one of the stories, key stories, of course, of the exhibit is neighborhood change and development and urban planning and that sort of thing. So did you reach out beyond the Jewish community, and if so, how did that work out?
Well, we got in contact with different groups. At the time, there was a evolving tenant association for the new housing being built, and a lot of the people who were moving into the new housing were people who had lived in the housing projects before. They actually had first choice to move back in. So we were able to get in touch with people who had lived in the Flag House Courts and Lafayette Courts and talked to them, and we did some interviews with people and invited them to share their experiences. We also went to different groups in the neighborhood. I remember going to a senior housing. We would post flyers asking people to get in touch with us. So I know there's a senior housing place near here where we put up flyers saying, you know, if you'd like to be interviewed for this project, please let us know, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we attended meetings of the Jonestown Planning Council, which was active at that time. Father Lawrence over at St. Vincent's had set that up, and so that provided a lot of opportunity for talking to people, too, in the neighborhood.
And did that also help your collecting? How much of the collecting was already here in the museum, and how much, not the exact number, but how much did you have to? You talked about the bathtub and stuff like that, but were there other things that in your interviews with people became part of the collection that are now kind of treasures of this place?
I'm trying to remember. As Saul mentioned, the JMM has an absolutely remarkable collection, and I think that most of the things in there are from the permanent collection and were not collected specifically for the exhibit.
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at the exhibit, there's not that much in there that's artifacts that belong to people. Really only a small number. I think we did a good job of kind of disguising that fact, actually, because,
I think you did too.
we went out and, a lot of it is just props. So I'm not sure that collecting was a huge part of this, aside from the oral histories, was a huge part of what we did.
I think that's right, and I think that what happened is that we knew there were certain really important, remarkable things in the collection existing, and to an extent, the exhibition was designed around that because we wanted to highlight the things that we knew were available.
Right, like the Yiddish theater poster, for example, and some of the synagogue things that are shown, I think. But things like the sewing machine, anything that you can touch or even if you're not supposed to, are props. Like the sewing machine, I don't think was part of the collection, but
That was mine.
it was Anita's, so there you go. So,
Well, and Deborah, I know when we were talking, you also mentioned the Heritage Walk, which was when those brochures are still in the exhibit. So that was also part of the gestalt of the city when you were working on this exhibit. I don't know if you want to say anything else about that.
yeah, well, Heritage Walk was something that I guess Avi originally got the museum involved with connecting with the other institutions, the Lewis Museum, which actually hadn't opened yet but was being planned, and the Carroll Museums, and the Flag House. And the idea was really a promotional idea, was how do we get people across the Jones Falls to come in to see these great cultural resources that are here. And that group started meeting, and when I came on board, one of my jobs was to sort of be the point person for the museum in keeping that group together. And what evolved out of that was Heritage Walk, was to have a walking tour that started in the Inner Harbor and came to this area and went all around. And through that, we got to know and be partners with all the other players in this neighborhood. And the museum, the exhibit was designed to sort of reflect that whole Heritage Walk. One of the reasons it's so place-based as opposed to just like the immigrant experience-based was because we were very place-based at that time and trying to think about this neighborhood and be as inclusive as possible and showing all the changes. And a lot of the changes, of course, the neighborhood didn't have a good reputation generally. It was considered the place where there were, there were riots during 1968. And we wanted to confront all that and talk about all that and talk about what happened and why it happened and what came after, and that the neighborhood is still evolving. And I guess that's where the kind of hopeful part came in, is it will, continue to evolve. So,
Thank you. So we also got some questions. I'm going to throw a couple of them in. What is your favorite part of the exhibit for each one of you? I know it's like asking what is your favorite child, but do you have a part that you have a special fondness for or great memories about creating?
I love the tenement apartment. I think that's so evocative, and I don't know if the sound is still working in there, but there's a soundtrack throughout the exhibition, and there was sound in that part too. And I just, because it's one of the first areas that you walk into when you walk into the exhibition, you get a sense of, I hope, what it was like to actually live on Lombard Street in one of those tiny little apartments.
How about you, Deborah?
well, I suppose I could say the outhouse. I don't know.
The privy?
But the idea that we could fit a little alley in the exhibit, which I don't think we were sure how we would do that, but Chuck somehow figured that out.
Did anyone try to use it?
Not that I know of, but I don't know if they're still there, but there are tiny little flies in it that we glued on
little plastic
painstakingly.
flies. Yeah.
Yeah. We really, again, the fun touches, we really enjoyed things
Yeah, I
like
didn't
that.
see a newspaper, though.
And that was our one little controversy is we had the plaque that said, the quote was, "I used to read the best novels in that toilet." And it was attributed to a person, and that person's family objected. They were embarrassed by that, so we had to change it and make it an East Baltimore resident. So,
That's interesting.
yeah.
So, to get to this point about the design and presentation and all the choices you made in doing the exhibit, I think I'm pretty well aware of what other history museums were doing at the time. But I don't know if I'm as aware of what other Jewish museums were doing at the time. And I just wondered whether you wanted to reflect on that. Was this, kind of in the frontier of what a number of the Jewish museums were doing when they were working on their core exhibits? Was this just an example of best practice? I mean, how would you compare this exhibit with some of the other experiences that I know each of you have had?
I know when we were talking in preparation for today, I think you're the one, Marcia, who pointed out that you thought it was an example of best practice at the time. And I would absolutely echo that. I think that Jewish museums at the time were realizing that in order to survive and be relevant, their content needed to appeal to audiences beyond Jewish audiences. And so we were very mindful of that at the time. We might have been, at the forefront, but I wouldn't say that this exhibition is terribly cutting edge. I think it's just good, solid scholarship reflected in an immersive environment.
I don't really have much to add to that except to say that the Jewish immigrant experience is something that a lot of museums deal with. And we wanted to, capture that as well as we could. And I think, basically the quotes are what led the way for us. So I think when you go to museums now, you see that quite a bit, that quotes being featured. But I don't think at the time that was quite as common. It just seemed obvious to us. I don't even think we really thought about it that much, but that having the voices of the actual people, we wanted people to be able to connect to their past as much as possible. And a lot of people were actually related to the people who are quoted in their grandmothers and their grandfathers and their great-grandparents. So I think we tried to keep it simple in that way and not, go heavy on tech. I think tech was just starting to come in maybe at that time, so we might have been a little bit behind on that. But I think that was intentional.
I think that one thing I remember Avi saying, the hallmark of a good exhibition is one that you can walk through without reading and you can still get a sense of what the exhibition is about. And I think this achieves that. And then for people who were planning to read, we provided a kind of a hierarchy of information, so you could read just the big text without the detail, and you could get a slightly deeper sense than just a walkthrough. But I do think that, to Avi's challenge, I think that you can walk through this exhibition and get a sense of what it's about and never read a word.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also think that the use of so many quotes, to just echo what you're saying, Deborah, contributes so much information and so much specific, perspectives, much beyond what a kind of, I don't want to say scholars are boring, because I don't think they are.
That's what you can say,
Sort of
that's
sort of a third person kind of description of some of the same phenomenon. And I think it just catches your eye and your attention, and it sticks with you in a different way.
But yet it's still informed by all that scholarship.
I know, which is
Completely.
that is, I think, one of the big challenges of all exhibitions, right? One of the questions we got is, what would you have done differently, or would you have done anything differently, if you can think back?
I don't know. I don't.
I don't think so. Wow, sounds a little egotistical.
Yeah,
but
I know, really.
I'm really pleased with it. I will say that remains to this day the best exhibition project I ever have been engaged in. From start to finish, I just enjoyed doing it, and I'm proud of the product.
Yeah. I think there was one staff member of the Jewish Museum, when we did our first walkthrough, who said, there's too much text. So, that there could always be, less text, I suppose. But
It
I
was
don't
a
know
lot
how.
of- it
I mean, I
was-
guess we did the best we could. So it's hard to say how you would do it differently. Even if the exhibit could be better, which I think maybe it could be, I don't know if, I would be capable of doing anything different from what I had done, what we had done.
Well, I also think, I know that there's been a lot of work done in technology in museums, and I can't put a timeline on all that work, but you're probably right in terms of where this exhibit fits. On the other hand, I don't know of too many museums, even then, that were doing soundscapes the way you were doing soundscapes, and also had those chickens, the cues for families and for kids, because I think still a lot of the history museums and Jewish museums, I mean, there'll be a totally different track, or maybe there'll be a children's area, but there won't necessarily be a children's narrative that you can weave through the exhibit. But do you think that's an apt statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I don't know how cutting edge it is, but one thing that you bring up with regard to the little chickens, which are text designed for kids, is I guess one area where we could have improved is that it's very confusing to this day in that exhibition what you're allowed to touch and what you aren't.
Yeah.
And you entered and it looks like an immersive hands-on exhibition, but really you can't touch everything. So there's a little blurriness between that, and I think that maybe confused visitors a little bit.
Yeah, I could understand that. I wanted to touch all sorts of things until I saw the sign. So, as you think about trends in exhibits, because you're both still deeply involved in exhibits and museums, did doing this exhibit impact what you do now and how you've thought about your work and your projects since?
Well, I mean, you're the one who pointed out it was best practice for the time. I think it remains best practice. I mean, if somebody curated an exhibition like this today, I don't think it would necessarily look outdated. I think that technology is playing a much bigger role in museums. In some ways, I'm a bit of a dinosaur because I believe that what makes museums singular is the authenticity, the ability to see the actual things. And while technology is important to help add depth to the interpretation, I think it's really important to have the real stuff whenever possible. So in that regard, this exhibition holds up.
Yeah, I would agree. I think also the tendency is to sometimes put too much into exhibits, and they get kind of crowded, and some exhibits, I think that's something that, we may not have completely succeeded in. I mean, there's a fine line between having an immersive experience and being able to see lots of things and then going over the edge and being too crowded. So, I don't know. I'm not sure how, it definitely has impacted how I look at exhibits that I do, but I still have to watch for the same things that I had to watch for before, like, okay, I wrote this, now I got to cut it all in half, and then I have to cut it in half again, and
Yeah.
you still have to do all those same things. So.
Yeah. So I'm getting a signal. So I think we can have time for some questions. I just want to thank the two of you. we've already, when we did a little prep call, we had trouble getting off the call in an hour. So there's a lot we could keep talking about. And I'm sure that you have some questions here in the audience. So, oh, yes. So we have time for a few questions.
Is the exhibit here now to see today?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, it's there. Thank you.
Okay, and there's a question. Hi.
Curious as to how the oral interviews, the process that took place to form this exhibit, how did it inform another exhibit you recently did at BMI about Beth Steele, and you did together, while not as immersive, there's a similar vibe. How did they inform each other, if at all?
Okay, so disclaimer, that's my husband, and he had to, he had to
No
throw
fair.
in a plug for the Baltimore Museum of Industry, so thank you. That was not a paid placement. We've had the pleasure of continuing to work together over the years, and when we opened the Bethlehem Steel exhibition at the BMI a few years ago, it was thanks to Deb, who is the curator. So if you want to talk about your use of oral histories.
Well, I think again, we tried to use the oral histories that other people had. The museum did some oral histories for that exhibit. Yeah, a bunch. I did some, and some of the staff people at the BMI. But there was also a labor historian, Bill Berry, had already done a ton of interviews, and so we had that same kind of depth of oral histories that we could draw on for the Bethlehem Steel exhibit. And so again, it was just natural to use those. And that's what we did. So when you have that resource, it makes it just easier to, you just want to use it. So when you don't have that resource, you have to think about doing other things. But if the resource is there, it's like, why not? Why not go to the voices of the people who experienced these things that we're writing about? So,
yeah, I mean, oral history.
but everybody should go see it, the Bethlehem Steel exhibit at the Museum of Industry.
Thanks,
for sure.
Henny. Yeah, I mean, oral histories are great raw material for exhibitions. They're inspiration, just like physical artifacts are. So that's a good reminder.
I have one more question. I'll let Zoe pick.
Yes, hi. I'm wondering what will happen to all of the parts and pieces of the exhibit, and kind of to put in a wish for it, as our younger generation are coming up and may not have had an opportunity to see it. It's a wonderful teaching exhibit for the future. So I'm putting in a plug that it lands somewhere.
That one's for you, Saul.
Well, and I didn't get to it, but Saul showed you the catalog, and even though the catalog will remain, I think it's an incredibly powerful collection of essays that not only go deep into the subject covered by the exhibit, but then puts this into national and even international context. So hopefully, I believe I'm not speaking out of turn. I think Saul and the museum will keep mining this material and the material in the exhibit and so many of the programs that will be coming up. Thank you so much. Thanks. It's great
Thank you.
talking to the two of you.